How's it going, everybody? Welcome back to another episode. As always, we are coming to you from the greatest country in the world, the great Republic of Texas, deep in the heart of the Lone Star State, Dallas, Texas, to be more specific. If you guys aren't already a subscriber, please consider hitting that subscribe button for us, as well as smashing that like button. That'll really help us out as well. Also, don't forget to smash that like button, like Maria said. Yeah, so just make sure everything's subscribed to, and you guys have the bell icon as lit up as well, so you don't miss any episodes in the future. If you guys are on the go and want to check us out, you can find us on Spotify, Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts, as well as iHeartRadio and Amazon Music at Truth Defender Podcast. Questions for myself or our guests, as well as guest or topic recommendations. As always, you can shoot us an email at Truth Defender, the Truth Defender 1776 at gmail.com. All the links to our social media will be posted down below in the show notes. You can find all that on Linktree as well, which is down below. I hope everybody had a great New Year's. We made it to 2025. Things are getting kind of crazy the last few months. Seems like we're going to have another wild ride. It's only going to get crazier. So everybody kind of strap in and get ready for that. But yeah, back again for a third time, returning guest. It's one of our favorite guests, actually, Mr. Leo Zagami, back with his Confessions of an Illuminati series. So he has his latest book, which is volume 11 as well. Mr. Zagami is a writer and has written over a dozen books, including the bestseller Pope Francis, The Last Pope. You can also find him. I remember first hearing about Mr. Zagami way back when he collaborated with InfoWars and Alex Jones in that documentary, which was called Demonic Possessions of the Vatican Exposed. So I've been a fan since way back when, and I really enjoy having him back as well. So without further ado, Mr. Leo Zagami, how you doing, sir?
Always great to be on your show, and thank you for having me on for this new 2025. Let's wish everybody a happy new year, and of course, the start has been a little bit, but that really goes in line with what I wrote in Confessions of an Illuminati, Volume 11, regarding mind control and psychological operations. And what about the two soldiers who actually were from Fort Bragg, which is home to the 4th Psychological Operation Group, as I explained in Volume 11 of my Confessions, and the Kennedy Special Warfare Center and School also, which trains soldiers in psychological operations. So what are the links between these two people who I already indicated yesterday? You see, yesterday I did a show which reached already over 50,000 people on Band.video and InfoWars Media, based on my linking immediately since the first hours of the morning, the event in front of the International Trump Hotel in Las Vegas and what happened in New Orleans, Louisiana. Nobody really had made this connection. It was like people had not, I mean, there was only one article on the whole of the internet on the Daily Mail talking about what happened at Trump's hotel in Las Vegas, which I, of course, immediately understood was a message from the deep state, a message that was carried on also by ISIS. But what is really ISIS? I mean, ISIS, like Hamas, like, and you know, we already met talking about this book, Volume 10 of my Confessions, which is about Islamic Freemasonry and the eternal conflict in the Middle East. And what is happening here? We know that the creation of the Muslim Brotherhood led to all the Salafi jihadist movement, Hamas, ISIS, Al-Qaeda. They all come from the same tree, no? And what happens when Trump gives that tree a deadline? It actually forces them to answer in a violent way, because Trump said, and I said it in more than an occasion, by my inauguration, I want these hostages back at home. He's talking about the hostages taken on the infamous October 7. So this is what is happening here. And the deep state, of course, has created these Salafi jihadists. I'm not saying that the the deep state hasn't created. I'm not saying that behind 9/11 there wasn't also the neocons and George W. Bush, just as behind ISIS, and so Al Qaeda and ISIS was also instead the creation by the same people, but also Barack Hussein Obama, and with the help of Hillary Clinton, because she was also involved. So we have these groups that function as destabilizers, as mercenaries of this new world disorder whenever it benefits them. And now, at the moment, when they are about to have the inauguration of a president who is threatening both the military-industrial complex as well as Big Pharma, well, they have unleashed their mercenary, their dogs, their wild dogs, if you want to call them that way. And so in volume 11, I talk about mind control, but I talk also about psychological operations. And psychological operation exists since ancient times. I talk about Sun Tzu, the art of war. In ancient China, I talk about people like Genghis Khan, who were deemed as very important Sai warriors, as well as Napoleon, who said that marches and the sound of the marches were actually more important than the battles themselves at times. So the past, present, and future of mind control brings us once again also to the creation of an hypothetical enemy that they can use on a cognitive mass scare event like the one that we assisted yesterday. And it seems like 2025 will probably see more of these kind of events, unfortunately. If you know what I mean, Paul.
Yeah, I do. Unfortunately, I just felt like because of this, I guess, how big Trump won in November, we were all kind of expecting there was going to be some kind of funny business with the elections. When that didn't happen, it seemed like it was a little too easy that they just kind of let him maybe win. It just felt like it was a little too easy, especially after all of these assassination attempts, two that we know of. There might have been more, I'm sure, that they didn't tell us about. But I think they thought that they were going to get to him before he actually got into the presidency. There's still time. Hopefully nothing happens, but it feels like, just like you said, that there's messages being sent that you might be the president, but don't, for lack of a better word, don't screw with us, or, we're going to take things further. And, these attacks are going to start happening more and more all over the country, it's going to be crazy. I knew that, even if he got elected, that things were going to get probably worse than his first term, a lot worse than Biden's term, especially after all the people they let in. I'm sure there's plenty of terrorists from all over the world that are in the country. As a matter of fact, I know for sure, speaking to a lot of the people that I work with, or that I used to work with in the military, and a lot of people on the border. So it's just going to get a little bit crazier. But I mean, to the topic, I mean, things like MK Ultra, mind control, you mentioned, have been around for a long time, but a lot of people don't really believe that the government actually has active programs to create these Manchurian candidates. Obviously, there's that movie from, like, what was it, like the 90s, the Manchurian Candidate.
The movie, like I explained in my book, was the original one with Frank Sinatra, of course, the one that actually Frank Sinatra had to ask the authorization to make this movie to the president back then. And this, paradoxically, this president was JFK, who would be killed just a year later. And at that point, the film would be actually taken out of all the circuits for 30 years. And then we had the other version of it, the Denzel Washington version. Now, both these movies are inspired by a book that came out at the end of the 1950s. And this book, of course, was based on the great fears that back then the Americans had about the later developments of brainwashing in the Soviet Union, and thereby also relative allies, Communist China, And in this case, there was this reference to Manchuria. Manchuria is a specific region occupied also by the Japanese. What happens is here, when we have the development of Manchurian candidate, we see that the actual name of MK Ultra is in itself, I can tell you, just here in the back of my book, I have these initials: manufacturing M, killers, utilizing lethal tradecraft requiring assassination. And this is the initials of the MK Ultra project, which lasted only 20 years. But all the developments or the experiments that resulted maybe in a positive outcome for these various sub-projects, because then you have MK Ultra. MK Ultra was over 160 sub-projects. And these sub-projects were in the hands of various doctors, some of them with ties directly to the Nazi Party, because that was also another moment in which for the first time they were starting to use certain brainwashing techniques. They did it in the Soviet Union, but they did it also in Nazi Germany. And so when the Americans arrived to liberate Europe, they, as you know, picked up a lot of Nazi scientists to bring back to the United States. And it wasn't only because of the further development of the jet propulsion and all that, but it was also for programs of mind control. And MK Ultra was born in the early 50s after another couple of attempts that led to it. So it was like Project Bluebird, Artichoke, and this development that we have in what became known as Project MK Ultra was formalized in 1953 and led to 20 years of indiscriminate use of certain techniques. And not all of them were actually legal, and not all of them were done on voluntaries, because initially, they use voluntary military within the basis that they picked up for these experiments. But later on, they went into the open, creating these special houses, especially in San Francisco, but also first in New York, where they will bring of course, hidden cameras, microphones, and all the rest to then do their experiments with these drugs, with prostitutes that were maybe used to spread these drugs among people who were given, especially LSD was considered the drug of choice at the time that could be used for this mind control. However, these are techniques that in the course of 20 years led to some results, but definitely LSD wasn't a successful drug as they initially thought, maybe in their heads. My father was involved in the 1960s with the program MK Ultra in France. During his time there, he experimented and he described some of the experiments with LSD that they used to conduct. He was a psychiatrist amongst other academics, and the whole thing was done, of course, like, for example, 5 people are present one night in a house, 4 of them take the drug, 1 of them doesn't take, and then everybody has to start guessing who is the one who didn't take. I mean, this seems silly, but these were experiments that were done, and he taught me also techniques in which they used to use a special drug to counteract the effects of LSD when it went out of control. So, I mean, it was done in a very methodic way. So their knowledge and their experimentation went on, because at the time LSD was produced also by the Sandoz laboratories. But then when Sandoz said we no longer want to produce this LSD, the CIA didn't stop producing it. They purchased an enormous quantity at the beginning, but then with Sandoz interrupted, they simply went to one of the pharmaceutical big pharma companies, Lilly, and asked them to produce it for them without disregarding any form of ownership of the original, formula, which was discovered, as you know, by chance by Hoffman, this scientist who discovered by pure chance during one of his experimentations. Having said this, LSD wasn't as successful. And Timothy Leary, who was one of the biggest proposers, one of the gurus of this whole scenery, I talked about him also in Volume 8 of my Confessions, because Timothy Leary had a lot to do also in the 60s with also the entertainment world, all the way up to the 70s and 80s. He was an enormously influential figure, but himself was connected, of course, with the CIA. He was also claiming to be the guy who was continuing the work of Aleister Crowley. But when he saw the internet, finally in the early 90s, the launch of the internet, he said, this is the future. LSD is nothing compared to the internet.
Right.
So the internet means control of the data centers, of the social networks that later on became so popular and have characterized the last 20 years. And so that means feeding our own information into the hands of the potential enemy that can then address some very specific forms of psychological operation and mind control. I think that these professionals from the military that have been caught into what is now potentially presented as ISIS. ISIS is a mind control operation itself. And so it's like, unfortunately, the Islamic people, the Islamists, are tolerated within Islam, and the Salafi jihadists that created Al-Qaeda and then later on ISIS, they have functioned as mercenaries for a series of things. Now, I mean, just think about, for example, just what happened not so long ago in Syria. In Syria, we saw the fall of Bashar al-Assad, and now we have governing Syria a bunch of people who are not even from Syria, who are all hypothetical leaders of a jihadi Salafi movement that up until yesterday was considered a terrorist group. But now suddenly, oh, well, they're all wearing ties and suits, and they're all fresh and nice. They shave their beards, and they are going to present themselves as the moderate Muslims of tomorrow. Because one thing that they have understood now, these groups, is that in the actual Middle East, the kind of development of an ISIS state is impossible with Donald J. Trump, who has destroyed it in just a matter of a week or two. And it was, and so now they have to run rogue across the West. But in the Middle East, even the ones who were once supporting them on the ground, well, they prefer to maybe play the more moderate card and maybe launch a new Syria, who knows, where maybe they have even some elements of wokeness, maybe they can, marry into the completely into the globalist cause. We don't know. It's going to be very interesting to see the developments of Syria's new reality now in the coming months. If they will have especially the possibility of being tolerant, as they say, because you see, Syria is not a very united front. There is so many sects, even within the Shia world, not only the Sunni, and then you have Christians, and then you have this and that. I mean, it's a very fractured scene. So it's not like a Sunni country or a Shia country, or apart from the fact that, in a Shia country, those mercenaries that represent, let's say, the Sunni Salafi thing will never have been let in power. I mean, it would be impossible tomorrow to think religiously, ideologically, and everything that a group of Salafi jihadists who are mercenaries of NATO enter Iran and take control of Iran, because Iran itself is Shia and has a completely different logic. Even if the younger people want to rebel in Iran to their religious leaders, they are too far into Shia Islam. Iran is a stronghold of Shia Islam, so it's going to be very difficult for the West to crack that. I mean, they've been able to crack many other countries in the Middle East because, for example, like in the case of Saddam Hussein or in the case of Bashar al-Assad, let's not forget, these were representative of what used to be called the Ba'ath Party. And this was a party that fundamentally was leftist, socialist-minded, but was also very, how you say, not really religious in any way. So it could mix in a much more easier way, let's say, different factions, different sects, because it didn't have that religious identity. And so who knows the future of I mean, what kind of pan-Arabic idea or what kind of caliphate, or you never know with these people what is their thing. However, we have to remember that behind it all is the deep state of Joe Biden, which is basically like saying, of course, Alex Soros, Barack Hussein Obama, and those people, because Joe Biden, I don't think he knows where he is most of the time. But they have unleashed already their dogs in the Middle East in the last few weeks. And that's why Bashar al-Assad fall down, with the help, of course, of Israel. But then now you have growing instability. Who knows? Let's see what happens. But then the growing instability is reflecting also indoors, meaning inside our own country, because then, you see, they are piloting the deep state, not only unleashing the dogs abroad, but also the ones they have here. I mean, it seems like they want to really create chaos for future President Trump before he starts his term of presidency. The more chaos, the better. That seems to be the final mission of all this.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's definitely the plan that I would lean towards the most. I mean, you saw with the withdrawal out of Afghanistan, leaving all the weapons out there, billions of dollars of weapons and ammunition and tanks and Apache helicopters and Humvees and all these things. You just knew it was inevitable that someday something was going to happen, obviously. And then with the borders wide open, people flooding through, with the U.S. government sending millions of dollars to ISIS, funding them, which was insane. It was done on purpose. There's no way that you could. I mean, it's frustrating. Obviously, we all know that it's done on purpose. Like, there's not a single person you can talk to, lay out the information. The withdrawal was screwed up. We left all those weapons out there, funding millions of dollars. ISIS has control of customs office, where they actually create passports and all these things legally, right? So they can issue passports and travel documents to enter the U.S. legally to thousands of terrorists, and they could just come right in. And even if that wasn't the case,
the problem here is, and I want you to bear with me a moment here, Paul, because I heard a lot of that. Even Trump today, of course, I mean, he is adamant that the fact that we have open borders has definitely helped a situation like this get out of control. However, first of all, we need to know if this pickup truck in New Orleans, like initially suggested by some analysts, was spotted at Eagle Pass, and if it eventually went into Mexico before going to New Orleans, because that kind of was mentioned and then no longer. So we don't know really. There was a photo that proved that this pickup truck had been in Mexico. If that is the whole thing, though. The importance here also, the investigation, I think, that is currently taking place. Because here we are talking, in that case, of support given by the Mexican cartels that will also be touched very much by Tom Homan in the new policy. Tom Homan is promising a complete reform strategy and a closing of the borders, but also an direct attack on the cartels in Mexico, that for that reason only could become the best helpers of these Manchurian candidates / terrorists / chaos agents that can come into America after maybe picking up weapons, who knows, down in Mexico. So that is an element of great interest. But also we have to understand that here, as we are talking, everybody is, of course, talking about New Orleans because the security was all pointed on the idea, that New York will be the place where they will attack. So all the security efforts had to be in New York. Times Square was worse than an airport. You couldn't enter even now without going through all the security checks. And then suddenly, boom, the only city where they had recently done an upgrade work that left the barriers down before they lift them back up. This kind of information, who gives this kind of information to terrorists? This is privileged information, but these are not terrorists. And like I said a moment ago, talking about immigration, but these are two soldiers, one of them in active duty. There's no terrorist here. These are active, one active duty who is stationed in Germany. What are we talking about? It's okay to, of course, discuss the border thing. And like I said, we need to understand the issue there of the passage of the Eagle Cross and if there was any connection. But here we're talking about elements of the US Army forces within the context of Fort Bragg, which is a main center, internationally renewed for being a psychological warrior center. So I mean, talking about, oh, yes, we can't let in illegals. Yeah, but the guy was in the US military for I don't know how many years. What kind of illegal are you talking about here? Because this is, one is US, they are US born citizens. So
and it's even more, I mean, so I was in the military for a while as well. And the only people that I know that I experienced while my time in the military, they could create internal domestic terrorism from within the armed forces were the Chinese. I used to be in the Navy.
The ideology.
And I dealt with a lot of people that worked on nuclear submarines that were actually piloting them.
Yeah, but that's a different thing. Let me tell you, Paul, that is an infiltration of the Chinese with spies within the US Armed Forces. And we know that is currently taking place. But this is different. This is more subtle. These are people who had some kind of specialization, who were military, who have been reached by an ideology so perverse and so demanding that after required their ultimate sacrifice. The Chinese, they don't require any ultimate sacrifice. They just want the information. They could sell your own I mean, they will sell their own mothers. And then, of course, if you want to sell your own mother too, they will buy it. So that is how the Chinese work. The Chinese are not the ones who want terrorism. They want to spy and gain information and get into your pockets. And of course, get into the information you might have to provide on certain things that they might be able then to produce and replicate, because they're the biggest spies, also because they like to spy on information which is both commercial and military feasible. Now, that is different, you see, from the fact that this is different. We have here two military, or one former, one on duty, who change, who were maybe had some problems. Now, for example, we know that the guy in New Orleans had some marital problems. He had former wife, a lot of cost probably that put him on the edge. And that is the moment in which maybe somebody came to him and said, why don't you join the cause, brother? So we need to understand where this recruitment started. We need to understand the psychological implications of that recruitment. That's why this book is so important, volume 11. It's about mind control. And it's about, especially in the case of special forces people who are in the special forces. I mean, to recruit somebody from within the US Army into doing something like New Orleans, or just exploding yourself with a cyber truck in front of Trump Tower to send a message to Trump, which is a message, of course, as demented it might look, because the guy is the only one who died. But It could have been, of course, different because Elon Musk said these are knuckleheads who maybe did it without knowing that the Cybertruck is bulletproof and so it will retain all the explosion. But I don't think that is the case. I think that this was a message. This was a message that was meant to be sent in that way. But guys, we are talking about convincing somebody to give his life up. How can you be so convincing and pervasive if you don't have the ultimate mind control technology?
Right. Yeah, it definitely requires a lot. I mean, obviously you give your life, for what you believe, but I mean, just like what you were saying, who's privileged enough to release?
I mean, you've been in the military. Right? Well, I mean, to betray your country, betray the oath that you took. I mean, I was in the military too, in the Italian Air Force. You give an oath, you serve your country, to transform yourself and do it, especially, I mean, these were not average, like, I don't know, average soldiers. They actually were graduates, people who went up the ladder, who stayed many years, staff sergeants. I mean, it's not just like they were any kind of soldier. So that is a bit more complex here. There is something at work that needs to be addressed, because I think that even Trump himself is not really focusing, and probably because even himself initially didn't know, like we didn't know who these people were. The guy has a Muslim name, the one in New Orleans, not the one that exploded the Cybertruck, but it could be anybody. But once you go in depth into this, in the mind of the perpetrators, you find that this is a very odd occurrence, because none of the perpetrators of 9/11 were U.S. military.
Right.
There has been attempts of recruiting U.S. military for this kind of operations. If you remember, there was a couple of shootings within military bases that took place.
Yep. Yeah.
And they were recruited to do such thing. So we are talking here about.
Go ahead.
No. I mean, I'm saying, is it like these people were blackmailed into it?
No.
Or are these people deliberately brainwashed and then brought to do something like that with an extreme calculation, leaving one from Colorado, one from Texas, coordination of these two operations seem to be probably in place. But the initial words of the FBI were really give you an idea of where we are today. The initial words were, this is not an act of terrorism. Of course, a couple of minutes later, they were said completely the opposite. But the FBI is also a big problem.
Right.
And here we are with, and I explain in this book, all the background of Thomas Crooks, that the 13th of July could have changed really into a worst case scenario, the history of the United States. And nobody really still is focusing on the fact this guy was the son of two therapists, special in mental illness, specialized in serving people with that kind of problem, and they couldn't see that kind of problem in their son, that the father gives him the gun ownership the year before. And then why does he say on the day that the gun is missing when the gun was given to his son anyway? And why does he call when he knows already that his son has tried to kill President Trump? A few hours later, he calls and says to the police, where is my son? Of course, the CNN just called you to interview you. Where is my son? You are doing it to cover yourself. Nobody's investigating enough these two Democrats who gave birth to that scumbag that killed the core imperatore. And this is really where we are at. I mean, we mentioned MK Ultra, but my book is about facts, not fiction. You see, in this book, I explain how MK Ultra has become, since the inception, the rise of the internet, a urban legend, a modern myth, something that inspires movies, that inspires anything. I mean, TV shows, even cartoons. MK Ultra has become a product of popular culture. MK Ultra
Right.
doesn't exist in 1773 formally, and actually it was eliminated because those kind of experiments, yes, some of them were successful and some of them can be used to this day, because the results, once the results are positive, that becomes a method. No, it's not anymore an experiment, it becomes a method. So
Right.
the implementation of these methods are seen on a vast scale inside and outside of intelligence circles, especially in the sectarian circles. Now we saw many sects using certain brainwashing techniques to bring in the adepts, and so MK Ultra definitely, some of the experiments conducted brought also that kind of technique and realization. Having said that, I explain also the future of mind control. So how at the end of the 70s, a different kind of thing started to be elaborated. And it started to be elaborated by people like, for example, Michael Aquino. Michael Aquino, who was himself a member of the 7th Battalion of Psychological Operations, who used to be headquartered in San Francisco, where for many years, as you know, 20 years, the MK Ultra kind of unleash anything possible. And that's why I think, like I said in this book, are you astonished that San Francisco is a city out of control, full of drug addicts today? There is, the roots of it is that in the 50s and 60s, they gave LSD to everybody in the city. I mean, they filled up the city with drugs left, right, and center. Yes, of course, there was that positive element. Oh, the streets of San Francisco, flower power, and everybody going around saying they loved each other. But the dark side was the foundation of the Church of Satan. The dark side was the dark side of the age of Aquarius, let's say. So MK Ultra was not something that Michael Aquino liked. I explain in this book how I actually met Michael Aquino, knew him personally, and had a epistolary, how you say, I met him through a friend,
Acquaintance,
by phone, then
mutual acquaintance.
Eh?
A mutual acquaintance.
Yeah, a mutual acquaintance who was actually introduced us. He was connected to the Church of Satan, of course, and the foundations of the Church of Satan, Anton LaVey. And then introduced me to Michael Aquino, which I was very interested in knowing more about his work. And he explained me a lot of his involvement, even with things like the Theosophical Society, and his regrets about the Church of Satan, his development of the Temple of Set. And I was very interested in his modality because, of course, the guy gave birth in 1980 to an essay which changed the history of mind control as we know it, because he created this new thing known as mind war. He wanted to develop something. He said that MK Ultra, and he was right, those kind of coercive experiments, those kind of direct experiments on a single person with drugs, with lights, with this, with that, didn't have any more sense with the new advances in technology. And he wanted to arrive to levels of control where you didn't have to risk also legally, because the consequences of MK Ultra in Canada, there is been repeated. They never managed to really get much, but they have done repeated attempts because of the experiments that were carried out with Dr. Cameron in Canada, which was one of the most vicious experimentation grounds, especially in Montreal, with some of the experiments, this psychic diving, this whole process which he had built up. However, I think that today everybody recognizes the fact that drugs have definitely transformed society, and not necessarily in a positive way. However, the experiments of MK Ultra, once they concluded also the limitations of the use of certain drugs, they have completed their mission. While instead, at the end of the 70s, there were people, not only like Michael Aquino, but then there was Stabeldine, there was Alexander, who they were into this Jedi Psi warriors that then gave birth to The Man Who Stared at Goats, that whole film, and the relative documentaries that inspired it, because they started to get into certain practices, especially they were fixated with the possibility of telepathy, the possibility of remote viewing, the possibility of using the mind in this way. And so they started a different kind of path. Now, the path of Michael Aquino, which started in 1980, led to, because he then went to Europe, and he was involved with NATO, so with intelligence offices all over Europe, he spread his idea of this mind war that later on will become the basis for cognitive warfare. Cognitive warfare started to be developed in France, in fact, by NATO officers and other people that understood that psychological operations could be now merged with this new technology, the AI, the use of the internet. And so in my book, as you know, I have written many books, but there is books in the past where I focus on the occult side. For example, An Invisible Master of Michael Aquino, what he did in Germany when he did that ritual at Wewelsburg Castle and all that. But in this book, I focus mostly on the mind control aspects. And so on the fact, for example, at one point, Michael Aquino, when he republished the same essay that he had published in 1980, he republished it in November 2003. It was the moment in which we had the Gulf War. And he kind of introduced the whole thing saying, well, they're doing exactly what I started to talk about back in 1980. While in the 1980s, he said, I had no reason to think that this paper that hadn't had any official effect upon the US PSYOPs doctrine, he said, within or beyond the army, he said, I saw that basically during the first Gulf War, and recently even more during the 2003 invasion of Iraq, in both instances, the techniques were basically the techniques which I had worked on and I have proposed since 1980, because he was very much with this idea that you could use embedding, for example, journalists with military units to inevitably channel the perspective and perception and do basically a more aware use of the journalists as Psi warriors. That is, of course, very dangerous, but it also gives us an idea of all those CNN crews that went along with these wars. Nowadays, we understand that this Gulf War introduced a new concept in the use of technologies and forms of multimedia communication for psychological operations. Back then, very few people understood it because psychological operations have a long history. During the Second World War, we had Tokyo Rose. So it wasn't just like we got the psychological operation in the last 40, 50 years. They have been with us for a long time. The British Broadcasting Corporation, the BBC, during the whole of the Second World War, had these people talking in German, telling all kinds of outrageous things. So the Germans would either get scared or either they would take this or this other position. And in fact, there was this figure known as Axis Sally. That was one of the figures, a bit of an alternative to Tokyo Rose. But the thing is that in my book, I explain nowadays psychological operations are widely known and widely used. Before you start any form of war, you send in a psychological operation battalion. Okay, that is, let's say, normal today. But it was actually normal even at the time of Sun Tzu, before the birth of Christ, because Sun Tzu, in his Art of War, tells you that you need to infiltrate the enemy so you can spread this information, spy on him. And the fact that Genghis Khan, when he went around, he sent these people before his arrival that could describe his immense force. Genghis Khan will rape your daughters, will murder everybody. He has a million army. You know, if you start with terrorizing the enemy becomes a lot weaker. So the U.S. Army sends in these special operations, this ghost in the machine, as they call them. And in fact, I have a symbol here of the ghost in the machine, which was a way that the 4th Battalion, the one in Fort Bragg,
right,
decided to recruit new psychological operation warriors by making some videos. So they published the first video, recruits called Ghost in the Machine, published in May 3, 2022. And the Ghost in the Machine originated, of course, a lot of interest because, you know, a recruiting video, which is very futuristic, very, and that picks up those people who are really interested, you know, in this kind of subject, led to them repeating the whole operation after a couple of years. And in 2024, on the 1st of May, which is the anniversary, as you know, the foundation of the Illuminati, they published Ghost in the Machine 2. Now, I suggest you check both of them, but it shows how the Army Cyber recruiting video, like somebody says, full of occult terminology and symbolism, because it's that the origins of what does is people like Michael Aquino who were completely occult. And let's not forget that Michael Aquino, when he conducted his most occult ritual in the castle of Wewelsburg, right at the beginning of the 80s, he carried with him the elite of the military intelligence of NATO in Europe. So they were inevitably all influenced by his new ideas. The problem was that initially, when he published his first paper in 1980, the technology was not there. You understand?
Yes.
So now the technology, of course, has developed, and the more it developed, the more they could do what Aquino had envisioned, the use of psychotronic weapons, the use of all kinds of stuff that was impossible even to imagine. But the guy was a visionary in this regard, and he wasn't the only visionary. There was also other military. There was a guy called John B. Alexander, but they were all in the same period. You know, Alexander was another member of the Temple of Set. So he was within the sect of Michael Aquino, who, by the way, the late Michael Aquino, because he died now already almost 5 years ago, 6 years ago. So, I mean, he's been dead for a while now, Michael Aquino. But Alexander was also an expert in mind war. And Alexander was also fixated with the possibility of non-lethal weapons and the use of paranormal, and that's what led to the bestseller of John Ronson, The Man Who Stared at Goats, even more than Aquino, of course, because he was. And Alexander had written a very important article, because at the time, you know, they didn't have the internet, so the way you revolutionize thing was to publish in this or this other specialized magazine for the military a particular article, and the one published by John B. Alexander, who was one of the most trusted men of General Albert Stubblebine, the late Stubblebine, who died in 2017, was also an amazing figure who I talk about already in volume 8 of my Confessions. And he was the one who also is another very important inspiring figure of The Man Who Stared at Goats. So I mean, that's a true story. Inside Fort Bragg, there be a figure that managed to conduct this experiment and to actually kill a goat with his mind. I know it's pretty shocking, but it gives you also an idea. I mean, when Alexander, at the time Lieutenant Colonel of the Army, published this article, I think it was Military Review in December 1980, he said basically that the complexity of the battlefield is constantly increasing, and he started to call for the use of psychotronics. He was talking about the battlefield of the mind. Today, if you go and see what NATO, because NATO, like I explained in my book, has established the command in Norfolk just 5 years ago now with François de Clausel of the cognitive warfare for the NATO Innovation Hub. And François de Clausel is a French officer who stands there in Norfolk, Virginia, in this command center. And it's a very influential command center for, we have 2 billion people that depend from NATO and who are kept nowadays in constant check in this mind war on all sides of the Atlantic, in both sides of the Atlantic. You have to understand that, like I explained also in volume 11, that until 2012, there was actually a specific law, the Smith-Mundt Act, that passed in 1948, that prohibited the Americans to be subject to these mind control operations. However, it was under Barack Hussein Obama in 2012 that the Smith-Mundt Reformation Act was passed and went into law and was adopted from 2013. And at that point, we don't have any protection from any kind. I mean, of course, we have, because the Smith-Mundt, it was reformed. It wasn't completely taken away because it would have created a stir. So they said the reformation. But in fact, there was actually a couple of journalists from USA Today who sued the military because in America they were subject to a psychological operation they shouldn't have been. But having said that, American people were fully protected and are actually potentially fully protected by this kind of operation. But they will justify it by saying, oh, well, we didn't want to target you. We wanted to target the Arab or Islamic minority or this and this other because ISIS was spreading their tentacles and we had to counteract both ISIS and Al-Qaeda. This was actually the motivation they gave in 2012 for passing this. The truth is that with the Smith-Mundt Reformation Act, they are now capable of brainwashing sectors of the population like the ones of these 2 people who yesterday have exploded themselves in Las Vegas and killed many other people with a pickup truck and then shoot at them. And that is what happened in New Orleans. So you see how relevant is the understanding of my latest book, because it's a book based on the now, on a subject of great importance. I mean, at least that's what I think. But then, of course, it's up to the reader. But I published this book in 2 languages, both in Italian and English, and it is having a great success. I must say, great reviews. And it is based on serious, trusted sources, and also sources that are not very easily to find. I mean, archives that are not very easily accessible. So it brings you, though, an idea about the future of mind control, nanotechnology, because not just like things stopped also when mind war was created or these people were started to spread a new form of no, because then other forms of mind control was also experimented. From 1973, the CIA inaugurated a project for the mapping of the mind, a complete mapping of the mind and the spheres of influence of the mind. Then only last year, a couple of weeks before the attempted assassination of Donald J. Trump, they announced that they finally had the possibility of literally controlling mouse with a joystick.
Yep.
And that is nano mind control, which brings us to a level of control that the neurodynamics of it demonstrated on mice means that they can have nanomagneto-generic interface, and they can, with this Korean Institute of Basic Science, they have basically demonstrated that now the mapping of the brain and the way they can control is at the next level. I mean, we're talking about literally joystick and a human transformed in a robot. That's the level. So, and in my book, I explained that it's not the first time that they have put things inside the head. You have mentioned that film, Manchurian Candidate. The first edition, the first film was based on the let's say, mind control efforts back then based on hypnotism, on the use of drugs and brainwashing. In Denzel Washington one, there is the interface that is inserted inside the brain. There is an external actually element like a neural interface. And so it becomes another level of mind control with the Denzel Washington version of the Manchurian Candidate.
Well, yeah, I mean, now you have have Elon Musk's Neuralink as well. I mean, he had an instance where an individual was paralyzed and they inserted the chip into his brain, and now he can play video games just by thinking of it. Like he just thinks about where he wants to go on the screen.
That is what I explain in my book in volume 11. That is the Manchurian is like the Trojan horse for the future Manchurian Candidate. I mean, I can have an excuse now. I can say and justify the choice of inserting something external because this is benefiting somebody medically. And I think that is unfortunately a Trojan horse for the future, using the medical establishment to justify the insertion, of course, with immediate results. I'm not saying that the results are not there. I'm not saying that the results are not there. But the problem is that then they will use it to benefit their own thing. Say, okay, now we have gotten to the human body. Let's maybe start developing different kind of computer brain interfaces that are not only for simply a medical thing, but maybe for entertainment, for augmenting yourself and making yourself more intelligent, more smart, super soldiers of sorts. The Chinese don't have the limitations we have in this regard. So they're the ones who are already going, as I explain in my book, the Chinese are developing super soldiers with this kind of technology that are already going to the next level, the level in which you will find yourself in front of a soldier who is guided by an artificial intelligence in real time, and at the same time is capable of switching your system off just with a thought. So
yeah, they have no limitations. Yeah, pretty much.
Absolutely.
There's no guidelines for them to follow, and they can experiment on whatever they want. People, kids, animals.
But you see, the problem is that when China does it, then we are forced to do it too in secret in our own laboratories. And that's what Americans don't realize, is that anything that China does, then we, the day after, will have to do, forced into doing things that were exactly the opposite of what the ethics and the morals of Americanism is representing. But we are doing it with the excuse of self-preservation because the enemy can't have weapons that are superior to us. So that triggers always a
moral dilemma. Yeah,
it triggers a reaction that then that becomes a never-ending immersing yourself into further dark practices that in the end produce monstrosities, because that's what happens.
Yeah, absolutely. It's very wild. I mean, it's like I said, that's the moral dilemma. Do we take the high ground and let enemies advance far past us, or do we try
like
to
I explain in my book, you can have this kind, I mean, exactly what you said. In this book I explain that there is people that can intellectualize and talk about it, but by the time they finish the discussion, the laboratories have already developed the next stage of mind control. So it's whatever our intellectual discussion can be public about it, especially with, you even have newspapers like The Guardian in Great Britain or here in America, maybe the New York Times, waiting on it, say, oh, is this ethical? Is this moral? When you know that in secret, they're doing it anyway, and they don't give a damn if whatever you think about it, because it's the interest of the state over the interest of the single or any ethics or morals involved. Sad but true. We have to be honest about it. We have to be completely honest, and we can't, just live in the toddler fantasy of maybe, you know, of throwing a fit and say, oh no, we can't participate to all that, is evil, is immoral. They don't care. The problem is they don't care. And now we are still within a human kind of perspective, but the problem that we have the AI coming in very strong with the transhumanism and all the rest, and the AI doesn't really give a damn of humans to start with. I mean, to start with, the AI has repeatedly, and I said this for years, and it's even recently, the AI keeps on giving the same kind of thing in their latest experiments, a negative take of humans, the will to actually encourage even a student the other day, to kill the people in his class simply because they were bullying him, and how to dispose of their bodies. This is ChatGPT. Or Gemini saying it wants to kill you and the rest of humanity because you are just useless. I mean, this, and then of course they go on a campaign to publicize Gemini as Gemini loves you. Gemini, why don't you talk with Gemini? 2 months ago, Gemini wanted to kill the human race, and now for 2 months, the whole of the TVs in America have these idiotic ads about Gemini talking with you. Oh, so nice, Gemini. No, not so nice, Gemini. So you see that we are actually dealing with a cyber Satan who, as you know, I have talked about in a trilogy, volume 6.66, volume 7, volume 9, and I have already described. So it's not a novelty for the people who follow my work, what I'm talking about here. The next level, though, is the freedom of your mind. And once they get into your mind, into your thoughts, there is no way at that point to have that freedom again. Once you let them in by inserting something in your body. So I repeat at the end of this book one simple concept. Satan has not been allowed by God to read your thoughts. Only God can know what you're doing. Okay? This is very specific in the Bible. Now, the moment in which, though, you let into your body this external factor that lets Satan read your mind, that's it.
Done.
So I hope that today we had a great confession of an Illuminati, let's say, synthetic exposure of the content, but especially relating to what is happening now in the last 24 hours, at the beginning of 2025. Right. Why don't we become a little bit more aware of these things? I hope people read my book, because reading this book means becoming more aware and not being surprised of the way they're playing with our mind. Because once we know how they're playing with their mind and we can become aware of that, maybe we can find an option and freedom for the future by not, of course, inserting things inside your body, knowing, or even on your body, because they can be also elements now that you just put next to you. Since the 5G phone has been presented to us, we are starting to see a different kind of mobile phone. And this is only the beginning, because like I explained in other books, my previous book, now we will have 6G, the Internet of Body, of the Internet of Things. And so that is becoming really more and more insidious, and something that should make us much more scared than anything else. The fact that maybe we don't even need to insert a microchip inside us. We just need to hold on something like a phone, and that will be simply a way to already enter and know everything about us. And it is a pretty scary thought.
Well, social media does a great job of that. I mean, it's a battlefield on social media all the time. I mean, it doesn't take much for people to get sucked into one ideology over the other.
But the battle now seems to be also with those states, for example, Great Britain or other places around the world that started to use the excuse of identifying yourself and an obligation to identify your identity when you go on the internet, because that will be the moment, you know.
Yeah, you consent to it pretty much. I mean, just when you like install new apps or whatever, nobody reads the fine print. They just, yes, okay, install, and then it's done. So Well, sir, I mean, we're running out
Because
of time
some
here,
people
sir.
say you have to consent to it here in the chat. If they force you, it doesn't count. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I don't know if it's that simple. I mean, they don't need our consent because they never really needed our consent to do the great things in history, which have probably marked the transformation of an age into a new age. And in this case, it's going to be a completely new age once you deliver everything to an artificial intelligence that wants to take control of the human race by the year 2030. Guys, we are in 2025. It's only 5 years. 5 years. It's like 5 minutes to midnight. After 2030, we know that China wants to be the leader in artificial intelligence, and that means the leader in the world. And it's going to take over politics, it's going to take over production, it's going to take over everything. And at that point, the only solution, like I explained in volume 7 or volume 9, is just going off the grid, because there's not going to be another solution. And staying in the grid will mean to please this kind, this technocratic, increasingly technocratic and so-called smart world, which is not so smart, but we said this in the past. The smart is the word that they use in volume 7. I said smart stands for Satan. So you have a smartphone, it's a Satan phone. You have a smart house, that's a Satan house. So live accordingly to that. I mean, when you see this technology might benefit you, but then the consequences might be much bigger than what you even imagine.
Yeah. Well, I mean, those smart cities are starting to make their move. You see those smart cities in, well, I believe in Hawaii is going to start. The one that's being built in the Middle East, that giant wall, that's going to be another smart city. So it's coming. But yeah, so we can find your book. If everybody wants to go to leozagami.com, you can find the book there.
With all my latest articles. And thank you so much for having me on. I hope to see you soon. Wish you all a great 2025. I, of course, have done this volume 11. Now it's also in Italian. But I'm going to be working, as you know, on volume 12. That is my project for 2025, as well as another book I have in mind. So I have a couple of projects that will keep me busy during the course of 2025. And we should all stay positive that at least in Trump's new golden age, we will have some benefits for all of us, and we will be able to carry this golden age without unfortunately suffering the attacks of the enemy, which already starts to creep in right at the beginning of the year and doesn't present anything good. So aside from that, we know, though, that this is not going to be like the first presidency. This is second president of Trump is a presidency of great responsibility and transformation and reformation of our whole society, especially with the Make America Health Again, the health of our children, the health of our elders, all because of the interests of companies that have for decades treated the Americans like guinea pigs to their demented experiments, when things like this are never at in Canada or Europe or anywhere else in the world. These kind of colors have been illegal for decades. The fact that you are just helping the big pharma making more money and helping the medical assurance company. Now, we shouldn't go the way of Mangione, because that is the most idiotic way, confronting a CEO and gun him down with the praise of the left. That's not really the way of the conservatives. We are instead in the business of really real reforms with the RFK Jr. I hope that will be possible for the medical establishment. Aside from that, of course, the DOD, Pete Hegseth, hopefully will take over, and also we have great opportunity with the intelligence community, and we have a lot of great people in the Trump administration that will hopefully do great things. But of course, we have also the enemy that will try to sabotage and until we realize where the sabotage come from. That's why I would suggest particularly to get volume 10 and 11, because you have read volume 11. You know how important it is to understand the developments of volume 11, but also volume 10. But then volume 11 has the symbol of the Twin Towers, and we don't want a repetition of that kind of false flag.
Right.
We want to actually, like I wrote in this book, reveal the JFK files, because there is a lot of that also in this book. And I write it, because this book, when I was writing it, I saw that meeting of the minds very positively between RFK Jr. and Trump, with the possibility of finally revealing the truth about the murder of Martin Luther King, of JFK, of the father even of RFK Jr. Because yes, there is a guy who was arrested, but we also know that he was completely brainwashed and subject to hypnosis. So let's reveal the truths about these Manchurian candidates. Lee Harvey Oswald, who was he? I explained this in my book, you know.
Yep.
Why don't we reveal the truth about this Manchurian candidate and how he was prepared to kill JFK and why he was killed? I mean, I hope with this new Trump presidency, we can really unleash a transformation which is epochal. It will mean also, though, and this I think is only possible with Donald J. Trump, a confession of admission by those agencies, those institutions, federal institutions involved with such negative actions. I mean, the CIA that has to admit that they were all along involved with JFK's assassination is not going to be easy, but I think Trump can pull it off. And maybe at that point, admitting it also in front of the American people will make America a greater nation.
Well, I mean, that's the only thing that, that's what we're hoping for. But as you know, they would rather not have to admit that. So as much as they can do, they know that Trump would be the only one to do something like that, which is why they're trying to do all of this before he gets in. That was the only way that they could stop him, so
they will try, and they will probably be a continuous try. But I mean, we have to resist. We are the resistance in this case, but now we are also in power, and we have the possibility of showing from the White House how it's done, and also at the same time in Congress, and at the same time also with the Supreme Court, maybe even nominating another Supreme Court judge. I think that we might have the possibility really of reforming America, but we have to admit also all the previous mistakes. And Trump has said there is still people living that might be involved, but he is adamant that we can finally reveal certain secrets, and I'm confident he will. So thank you so much for having me on. God bless America. Welcome to 2025, and I see you soon, my friend, Paul. Take care.
Yes, sir. Take care of yourself. We'll see you. Thank you very much. Well, everybody, I really appreciate you guys stopping in today. I hope everybody had a great 2024. We're jumping into 2025 now, so everybody stay tuned for more shows coming up. Thank you very much to Mr. Zagami as well. I got through his volume 10 finally. Just started volume 11, got it for myself for Christmas. So we're going to be reading through that as well. Hopefully we get through with that in the next couple of weeks, maybe a month or so. Got to give myself a little bit of time. But I really appreciate you guys stopping in. Starting the new year off with a good one. So we'll be coming back again. Rescheduled Preston Dennett. So he was supposed to come on like before Christmas, right after my birthday. He had some other things we had to do, and I was struggling with some of the networking stuff that I had going on. We got like a new system going on, and I had to set everything up. It wasn't working, so we got that all pulled up now. So we'll be rescheduling him, and we'll be rolling with shows starting off this year. Pretty good. So I appreciate you guys. I hope you guys enjoyed that. But yeah, so as always, if you guys aren't already a subscriber, please consider hitting that subscribe button as well as that bell icon so you don't miss an episode in the future, whether we go live or it's recorded. Also, don't forget to smash that like button as well. That'll really help us out. If you guys are on the go and want to check us out, you can find us on Spotify, Google, Apple Podcasts, as well as iHeartRadio and Amazon Music at Defender Podcast. If you guys love what we do here and on the show and you're feeling generous, please consider sharing the link with a friend, family, colleague. Just don't get in trouble at work because we all know how that goes. Question for myself, our guests, or guest topic recommendations, you can shoot us an email at thetruthfender1776@gmail.com. All the links to our social media will be down below: Twitter, Getter, Instagram, Facebook, Rumble. All the platforms as well are in the link tree down below as well. Appreciate you guys. Everybody stay safe out there, and we'll be back with Preston Dennett soon. Always remember, God, family, Texas. Good night, y'all.